The member for Amendment Cook-Tantramar.
Mr. Speaker, in the 2018 report from the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, and this week's landmark UN study, being called the Report on Extinction, scientists have stated that we must transform our economies and societies in order for humanity and a million other species to survive. The science is clear about what we need to do. We need to make big changes immediately. The Premier has stated that climate change is real and caused by humans. The Premier has rightfully acknowledged that climate breakdown is impacting New Brunswickers in significant ways. I know that we won't stop using fossil fuels tomorrow. However, I also know that physics demands that we quickly and significantly reduce the amount we are using. The science is telling us not to invest in new fossil fuel infrastructure. Does the Premier agree that we need to halt the creation of all new fossil fuel infrastructure in line with the science and recommendations urgently presented by the experts?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you for the question. Mr. Speaker, you know, the opportunity we have here is being a transition economy, not one that cuts off all economic development and hopes for the best, but one that transfers over time. And so when we talk about development, we talk about having jobs, and we talk about having a future, somebody has to pay for that, Mr. Speaker. Otherwise, things change dramatically, and people can't live and work. Equally, Mr. Speaker, we can't be the only ones on the docket here. We're dealing with competitors all around, most notably to the south. And, Mr. Speaker, it's interesting that some of the conditions that have been improved in the south, talking about the U.S., have been related to their shale gas development. They've backed out heavy oil in the industry and coal-fired generation because of shale gas development. That has been a major achievement for them in able to move forward in climate change activities and to reducing emissions. So, Mr. Speaker, but here, we hope we can just say we're not doing anything, but people will still work, live, and invest here. We know, Mr. Speaker, private sector investment has gone down dramatically in Canada, in New Brunswick, and private sector investment is going to help our future. We need to be a transition economy, not a shut-off economy, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Amendment Cook-Tantramar.
Mr. Speaker, economic development is not equal to fossil fuel development, and it is unfortunate that the Premier is not willing to take the urgent recommendations of scientists and experts. However, he is not alone. It is difficult for us to process these studies and to accept that we are part of a system that is threatening life on Earth. The good news is we have a long list of solutions and just enough time to avoid the very worst consequences of climate breakdown. But we need to understand and accept the scale of the crisis in order to mount the appropriate response. The UK, the world's 5th largest economy, was the first country to declare an environment and climate emergency last week. 28 municipalities across Canada, including Edmundston, Moncton, and St. John, have also declared climate emergencies. When asked by the media, do you think climate is an emergency here in New Brunswick right now, New Brunswick's Minister of Public Safety said, "Oh yes, I do." So, Mr. Speaker, my question to the Premier is, do you agree with the Minister of Public Safety that we have a climate emergency?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you for the question. Mr. Speaker, what I agree is that we've seen a climate change activity that has ramped up in the last number of years. I don't think anyone's going to deny that. The impact is how quickly is that ramped up based on human activity, and how quickly is it ramped up based on global change. And we know that we can all do our part, and we are doing our part. Mr. Speaker, we have a carbon plan that reflects the taxation on emissions through an output-based model, the costing model. And Mr. Speaker, it'll cost industry about $14 million more a year in our province through this plan. Now, that plan has been put forward to the federal government. It hasn't been accepted yet. It's been accepted from other provinces, the same type of plan, but not from New Brunswick. So you have to wonder, why are we being disadvantaged here in New Brunswick? That's a bit of a concern. But this $14 million, Mr. Speaker, you know what it is? It's industry paying for innovation to help us design the future, not shut the future off, but have a plan going forward. So let's industry, through the fact that we're charging them for the emissions that they're putting out, and let's put that money to real innovation, real results, to end up having a cleaner environment for the long.
Premier.